6 companies own the tracks that move a third of everything shipped long distance in America. By next year, that number might be 5. Some analysts think it eventually goes to 4. This isn't a hypothetical, it's happening right now, and almost nobody's watching it happen. Right now, if you're a factory in Ohio and you need to ship steel, you don't get to choose your railroad the way you'd choose a trucking company. In most of the country, exactly one Class 1 railroad touches your loading dock. Not 3, not 2, 1. That's the mechanism behind everything in this video. American freight rail isn't really a competitive market. It's 6 regional monopolies that occasionally overlap. And the reason is brutally simple economics. Laying a second set of parallel tracks next to an existing railroad almost never pencils out. So once a railroad builds a line, it usually owns that route forever. We got into the cost side of this in our video on the economics of freight trains. Track maintenance alone runs these companies tens of billions a year. Here, we're asking a different question. Given that reality, who actually holds the keys? In 1980, there were more than 40 major railroads in the US. 40. Then Congress passed the Staggers Act, deregulating rail pricing and letting failing carriers merge instead of go bankrupt. What followed was a 20-year consolidation wave. Mergers, buyouts, more mergers, until the map settled into 7 giant networks controlling almost all long-haul freight traffic. Then in 2023, 2 of those 7, Canadian Pacific and Kansas City Southern, merged into a single company called CPKC, the first railroad to physically connect Canada, the US, and Mexico with one continuous network. 7 became 6. Here's what 6 looks like today. In the West, BNSF and Union Pacific split the territory almost evenly, everything from Chicago to the Pacific. In the East, CSX and Norfolk Southern do the same thing, roughly along the Mississippi. Canadian National and CPKC run north-south corridors that dip deep into the US through Chicago and the Gulf. 6 companies, one map carved into non-competing zones like feudal territory. But here's what changes everything. That map is currently being redrawn live in front of regulators, and the outcome will decide whether 6 is even the right number by the time this video finishes uploading. Before we get to that, you need to understand something that sounds boring, but explains almost everything about how these companies behave. 5 of the 6 are publicly traded corporations, answering to shareholders every quarter. One of them isn't. BNSF, the biggest railroad in the country by revenue, is wholly owned by Berkshire Hathaway. Warren Buffett bought the 77.4% of BNSF he didn't already own back in 2010 for roughly $44 billion, the largest acquisition of his career. He called it an all-in wager on the economic future of the United States. Because BNSF isn't publicly traded, it doesn't have to chase quarterly earnings the way Union Pacific or CSX do. It can sink money into 40-year infrastructure bets that would make a public company's shareholders nervous. The other 5 all trade on public markets, which means their real owners are the massive index funds and institutional investors that own a slice of nearly every big American company. So when people ask who owns the railroads, the honest answer is one billionaire's holding company and the retirement accounts of tens of millions of Americans who've never thought about trains once. This concentration has a price, and it's not paid by the railroads. It's paid by the businesses that depend on them. If you're a chemical plant, a grain co-op, or a power plant served by only one railroad, you're what the industry calls a captive shipper. You can't shop around. You can't threaten to switch carriers. The railroad sets the rate, and you pay it or you find another way to move your product, which, for heavy bulk freight, often doesn't exist. Regulators built in some protection here. The Surface Transportation Board can intervene if rates get abusive. But by design, deregulation means the railroads mostly get to police themselves. Now here's where this gets bigger than a policy footnote. In July 2025, Union Pacific announced it wants to buy Norfolk Southern outright, an $85 billion deal that would fuse the biggest western railroad with a major eastern one into a single company spanning over 50,000 miles of track across 43 states. For the first time in American history, one railroad would run coast to coast without handing freight off to a competitor halfway through the trip. The Surface Transportation Board rejected the initial application in January 2026, calling it incomplete. Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern are refiling now, still aiming to close the deal in 2027. And if it goes through, the domino effect is the part that should actually worry you. Analysts widely expect BNSF and CSX would feel pressure to merge in response, just to stay competitive at the new scale. 6 becomes 5. 5 could become 4. Think about what that means. The same 4 companies that already act like regional monopolies would consolidate into something closer to two coast-to-coast systems, splitting the entire country between them. Every captive shipper problem we just talked about doesn't shrink in that world. It multiplies because there are fewer alternative routes left to even threaten switching to. Union Pacific's pitch is that bigger means better service, fewer handoffs, faster shipping. Critics call it exactly what it looks like, the final stage of an industry that's been consolidating for 45 straight years, finally running out of companies left to consolidate. Here's the thing about railroads that makes this bigger than trains. Almost every piece of infrastructure America actually depends on. The power grid, ports, even broadband, followed this same arc. Government-mandated competition, followed by deregulation, followed by decades of quiet consolidation, until what looks like a market on paper is actually a handful of private companies deciding what an entire country pays to move, power, or connect itself. Rail just happens to be far enough along that arc that you can see the endpoint coming. So by the time you're watching this, 6 companies own America's railroads might already be out of date. It might be 5. It might, within a few years, be 4. The question worth sitting with isn't whether that merger gets approved. It's this: at what point does infrastructure stop being a market at all? And does it matter if the trains still run on time?